We've just customized the layout of the real estate properties list. Now we also want to customize the layout of the detailed information on a specific property. For this, we have the Detail node with the Nested section, the General section. Now let's do some research on each aspect. We can see that the layout of the Detail node has an attribute that is marked on the transaction as Description attribute. And a Sections container where they will be loaded. In this transaction, we only have one section, but in this other one, for example, we have two, and there the container will make more sense. But let's leave this for later. For the time being, we can see that, at runtime, when we select a property from the list, the name of the property appears on top, followed by the rest of the information. When we select a neighborhood, the name appears on top, followed by two tabs to show us information, one for each section. If we take this attribute away from the fixed part, F5, we will see that it's no longer there, and now it only shows us the information from the General section. Here, we have all the attributes present in the transaction structure by default. Now let's go to the layout of the General section. To be more precise, we're in the Layout of the General section in View mode. This is the layout we will use every time we need to view the general information on a property. For example, when we tap on one of the properties from the Neighborhoods list of properties, or when we do it on the General list of properties, from this layout, we can modify or delete the property. Actions that, not coincidentally, may be seen here. Thinking about the architecture, when we open this screen, a request will be made from the device to execute the REST service, which is a data provider, that'll query the database and will return a JSON with the information. The screen will be set up on the device based on the information returned. When we decide to do an update on this property, which layout is this that we're offered, where we can change the values? Yes, it is the layout of the General section, but in its Edit mode. We see that in this case, the actions offered are saving or canceling. We are then working with two different layouts, even when they're initialized with the same attributes. We may want to prevent the neighborhood name inferred attribute from appearing in Edit mode. And that the identifiers do not appear in View mode, because they are internal to the system. And we're not interested in showing the geolocation either. Through the toolbox, we can insert other controls in the layout. Let's see our detailed information on a property at runtime, F5. When we view it, neither the IDs nor the geolocation are there. And when we edit instead, they do appear, and the name of the neighborhood does not. The Detail screen in Edit mode is also used to insert a new real estate property. We could think of this layout as the form of the transaction. The difference will be that this layout is implemented as one more screen in the WorkWith, and the handling on the database will be transparent to the developer through the associated business component, which will be a REST service executed on the server. We can also configure aspects of the table as we did with the grid, and even show the attributes by using some other type of control for deploying the information. That is to say, depending on the type of control of the attribute or variable in the layout and the type of data, user controls will be offered for both entering the information in the edit layout and for showing it in the view layout. For example, we can have the user decide the operation, sale or lease, not by using a combo box, but by using a wheel, through the wheel user control. We will do this for entering the operations, so it'll be for the layout in edit mode. Here we see some properties that need to be configured. Let's see it at runtime. F5. This case is more applicable when instead of just 2, we have several values involved. It also applies to numeric attributes, where a wheel with all digits is provided. This is very useful in touchscreen devices to avoid typing in through a keyboard. We can, among other things, use a numeric attribute for the user to rank information. The rating user control was created for this purpose. Or we can have an attribute entered by scanning a barcode or a QR code. When configured as scanner control type, a scan button will be placed next to the attribute, so that pressing it will open up the reader installed on the device. If the information of an attribute must be shown within a specified range, it'll use the linear gauge control. This option, among others, is documented in our wiki. How can we present all the information when we have, in addition to the general section, sections corresponding to related data? As we saw in the case of the neighborhood, in Android, 2 tabs are shown by default, each of them with the information of each section. This presentation will depend on each platform. Each section's layout, as well as its behavior, is customized separately. Like this, for example. Here, we customize this screen's layout, and here, we customize the information of this other screen, showing the real estate properties of this neighborhood. Now, why does the program executed know what neighborhood this is? Because it's received as parameter in each section. And also in the details. We can customize the layout of this section just as we did it before with the list of real estate properties, for example, by requesting that the properties be shown on a map instead of a list. If we now add the neighborhood info attribute to the neighborhood transaction of the varchar 1024 type, so as to save general information on the neighborhood, and when we want to show that information in a separate section, we delete the attribute automatically placed in the general section and create a new section, which we will call, for example, More Info, which by default will appear with an empty layout and in any mode. That is to say, this screen will be used both in Edit and in View. And there we insert the Neighborhood Info attribute control. We take away the label and specify that the field may grow as it includes contents. In the Rules section, we assign it to the parm rule for it to automatically filter by neighborhood. We specify the caption that will be seen at runtime. And we can also associate it with an image. As well as to the other sections. Let's see this at runtime. Once the information has been assigned to the neighborhoods, and we're seeing it here, but we also may want to modify this presentation of sections and tabs to another type of presentation. Where can we do this, and what possibilities do I have in each platform? Now let's go to the Detail node. This layout has a container control, all sections content, where the different sections will be loaded with the type we specify in the display property, which by default will have the value platform default. This is because the most suitable way to show the information depends on the platform. This relates to the size of the screen. Here we will see three options. Tab, corresponding to Android's and BlackBerry's default that indicates that each section be shown on a tab. Inline, meaning that each section is presented on the same screen one after the other. And Link, where each section is presented on independent screens through links, instead of on the detail screen. The iOS default is for sections with a grid to be shown as a link, and the others inline. With this property, and within the possibilities offered by each platform, the default option could change so that all sections are uniformly presented in a different way. For example, in Android, it's possible that everything can be shown as a link. However, if we wanted to show only the general information and more info within the tabs, and the neighborhood's real estate properties as part of the general information in the form of a link, we shouldn't use this property that applies to all sections evenly. Let's delete this control, which appears in the toolbox with the possibility of being reinserted. There is also a control for each section in the detail, so that it's possible to insert them separately for each to have an independent behavior. For instance, we may insert a tab control from the toolbox, and on the first page place the General section and the Property section. From among the properties of this item, we configure the caption, to which we can associate an image. In the second page of the tab control, we can place the More Info section. We'll configure the caption and also the image. And we can delete the third tab. In the table, let's modify the size of the rows so we can fit in all the information. We can now see that the display property of the individual sections takes 2 values instead of 3. Inline, which is the default, and link. For example, in the case of the property section, it refers to how we want the list of properties related to the neighborhood viewed to appear. On the same form as lines under the general flat information, or as a link, which in this case is what we want. We have designed the list and detail screens with an Android phone in mind, whose screen size is specific. But we may want to vary this design if the screen is that of a tablet, because more information may be contained in it. And in this case, it will also depend on whether we have a 7 or a 10-inch screen. Or, we may also want to vary the screen depending on the platform, to follow the guidelines of each. Or we may even want to design the screens differently when they will be viewed in portrait or landscape position. So, how can we take all these variations into consideration? To do this, we have combos on the lower margin of each layout. One is for selecting the platform. Another one is to define the size. And there's a third one for page orientation. The default option is any platform, any size, any orientation, which means we will have a single layout for view and one for edit, valid for all platforms, all sizes, and all orientations. But if we create a special one for a specific platform, for Android for example, we'll get a message like the one we see above, indicating that the layout does not exist. And we're given the options to initialize it empty, or to delete this layout. According to the edit screen, which didn't have neighborhood name, or according to the view screen, which did not have the identifiers nor the geolocation. We can now see that it shows us the labels on top, according to the Android standard. Let's change, for example, for the view layout in Android, the location where the image is shown. Now we have two different layouts defined for the view mode. Which one will be used in the application generated? When generated for Android, this one we see here will be used, and when the application is generated for any other platform, it'll be this other one. Let's see what the Android emulator showed before the change. And in the next generation, F5. The same application will probably call for a different look and feel when the platform varies. So, this schedule of a GX user's meeting shows differences in design according to the platform selected. Even without changing the platform, we may want to associate a particular design with an application developed for a specific client, and a different design for the same application but for a different client. We must separate the design aspects from those related to functionality, so that we may keep the tasks parallel and leave the design to the specialists, while we focus on our duty as developers in building the application. And how do we do that? To be continued.